Hey y'all, Casey here. I've lived all over. I spent the most number of years in Chicago where I grew up, but after that, the place that I lived for the second longest was Portland. I lived in Portland for the better part of a decade. During the time that I lived in Portland, I grew up and changed a whole bunch. And over those years, I saw Portland do the same. In some ways for the better, and in other ways, not so much. When I first moved to Portland, I thought, this is it. I found my home. I'm never leaving. This is it. This is my permanent home. I never dreamed in a million years that I would ever leave Portland. Recently, however, I made the very difficult decision to leave Portland for a better and brighter future. What changed? What made me leave Portland? Well, let's get into that. I just want to say that when I was writing the script, it brought out a lot of emotions and some of them not so pleasant. So I'm trying not to rely on the script too much because I think it's a little bit vitriolic, but it is coming from a place of truth. So, I don't know. Here we go. Portland is by far the most homogeneous place that I have ever lived. Homogeneity tends to breed intolerance and makes people uncompromising. If you don't have to live side by side with people who see the world differently from you, then it can become very easy to see those other people as others, people who are separate from you, people who are the enemy maybe, or somehow lesser than you and your circle. This is something that happens not just in Portland, it happens in plenty of other places, but unfortunately, Portland's homogeneity lends itself to this phenomenon. The homogeneity in this respect has led to a number of problems in Portland, but one of them is the political climate there. This political homogeneity not only creates a sameness, but also fosters a loudness on one side. And that loudness on that one side has created people who need everything to be totally perfect. If it's not perfect, they're going to fight it tooth and nail. If a policy or a project or an idea is not totally perfect, you better watch out, because these people are going to come for you. This uncompromising attitude has created a political deadlock around several issues, but one of them being local infrastructure. Portland touts itself as having exceptional public transit, which for a West Coast city, that's true. For a West Coast city, the public transit in Portland is pretty good. However, that is saying nothing to anyone who's lived on the eastern half of the country. Pales in comparison and has a long way to go to catch up to places like New York or Chicago. The reason I bring that up, though, is because due to the better than average public transit that exists in Portland, Portlanders, especially far left Portlanders, will use that as a reason to fight against car-based infrastructure. They'll say that because there's public transit, we shouldn't invest in car-based infrastructure. And that, honestly, is just dishonest, because, like I said, it's not that exceptional. It doesn't go everywhere. It shuts down relatively early. It just isn't a perfect solution for everybody's travel needs, you know? It's good. Don't get me wrong. It's good. But that has resulted in people just fighting tooth and nail against car-based development and has framed it as a either or. It's either this or that, right? So either we get a new MAX train line or we expand the highway, whatever. It doesn't have to be either or. You can develop both things simultaneously. And because of this attitude of shutting down any form of car-based infrastructure, that has led to Portland, which is not a terribly large city, having horrible traffic for a city its size. Like way, way worse than any other city that I've ever spent time in of a similar size. It has led to highways and roads that are utterly unequipped to deal with the current population of Portland. This same rationale has resulted in a parking scarcity on par with places like San Francisco and Manhattan, which is utterly unnecessary. Portland is not landlocked in the same ways that those places are, and there's a whole other bunch of reasons why it doesn't have to be that way. But because of people fighting against that reality, that there are going to be people who drive, it has just made it, has lowered the quality of life for people who have to drive, or people who just do drive. Maybe it's not even have to, maybe it's just they do drive. Another point why this is just dishonest, why fighting against car-based development is dishonest, is because one of the main reasons why people move to Portland, move to Oregon, is for the natural beauty. It is incredibly beautiful state. There are so many wonderful hikes, utterly breathtaking nature. You know how you get to those hikes? There's no public transit that goes to those hikes. It's all by car. So the idea that you can just live in this utopia where you can not have to need a car is it's untrue. It's unrealistic. It's just doesn't make any sense. So they both want to be able to have their nature, go to their nature, and also no cars. Doesn't work. This, again, uncompromising attitude has resulted in pushing out of development. Granted, Portland has developed a great deal in the time that I lived there, but that is slowing down tremendously. And it's because of the way that, I'll just say, the way that people get in the way of development. This uncompromising attitude has also led to development being either thwarted or heavily discouraged. And from a leftist point of view, that might be a good thing. You certainly don't want sprawl, and you don't want mismanaged development. That's true. That's all accurate. No one wants that. Or most people don't want that anyways. However, if you want to see a city grow and thrive, that is a necessary part of it. Some of the ways that people have gotten in the way of development in Portland are by not picking a lane, by throwing up different barriers, and developers just have to deal with it. When development takes it's a long game. It takes a long time to create new things. It takes not as long to create new policies that get in the way of those projects that are sometimes in mid-development. And one of the ways that this happens is through these special barriers they put up to developers. So it used to be, when I first moved to Portland, that you had to comply with X number of environmental requirements in order to build in Portland. At some point, leftists decided that no, it's not the environment that they care about. They care about the affordable housing issue of, specifically they framed around homelessness, but I'll say affordable housing. So now it's every place that gets built has to have some section of like affordable housing or whatever. And that's all, those are laudable goals. Those are good things. However, when you make it so stringent and you change it so frequently that developers can't keep up, it ends up costing the city. It doesn't just cost the rich developers, it costs all of the people that the rich developers employ. All of the construction workers, the electricians, the plumbers, all of those good union jobs, all of those working class people, those are the ones who get the most impacted by those leftist policies that have a good heart, but they have real consequences for real people. They're not just pie in the sky ideas. They're actually harming some of the most vulnerable working people. And also, that affordable housing requirement, that doesn't go to like homeless people most of the time. That mostly goes to 20-somethings who are too lazy to get real jobs and just want to pay less for rent. These policies have left vacant lots and empty buildings all over the city. Speaking of policies, let's talk about how Portland has handled the pandemic. Oregon and Portland have been super intense about their response to the pandemic, basically from the start. The government shut down everything for a while, longer than in most other states. After that, there's been times where things were shut down and then not shut down. There was lots of off and on and confusion. But even once the state no longer required places to be shut down, lots of businesses, lots of restaurants were deciding to still not allow people to eat in, to shop inside, these kinds of things, which it's their right to do so, absolutely. In fact, that's my preference, is that people be able to choose whether or not they want to be open for business or not. However, if you choose to limit your business, do not then be disappointed or surprised that you then go out of business. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, a lot in Portland over the last, I guess, year and a half. It's really sad, honestly. I've seen a number of my favorite restaurants go away, just permanently gone. The Bistro Montage, Brunch Box, Holman's, all of these places, some of these longtime Portland mainstays, gone. And it's really sad. It's just destroying the economy, and to some degree it's self-inflicted. Portland's economy is falling apart, and it just doesn't have to be that way. Whether or not places were open after the government stopped telling them that they had to be closed was a total crapshoot. Some places would just change their hours for that day. They might post a handwritten sign on the door so you might get there, and it's just not open. No real notice. Just haphazard, totally haphazard, which, again, I think is their choice to do that. They should have that choice, but it takes a toll on the quality of life. It's all of these little things, I guess. It's all of these little things that pile up, these small tolls in the quality of life that make it not worth it to live in a city that is expensive. Portland was never a place that was open terribly late. That was actually always a frustration of mine with Portland. However, the pandemic did not make that any better. In fact, it made it much, much worse. The hours of most businesses became highly irregular, unpredictable, and limited. Then there's the homeless problem. Nearly every city on the West Coast has a pretty sizable homeless population, and Portland is no exception. Compared to other places I've lived, Portland is a pretty easy place to be homeless in. Now, don't get me wrong, being homeless anywhere is not this idyllic paradise life. It comes with challenges no matter where you are. However, it is particularly easy to be homeless in Portland. There are free showers, there's free food abundant, the Medicaid in Oregon is quite good. Places that you can get temporary housing in if you want to do that for a little bit and then go back out in the streets. There's just a lot of options. And sometimes those options can be put to use to help people do better and get their life back on track. However, that just isn't the case for a lot of people. And unfortunately, the reality as to why that is the case, why people don't use these things to get back on their feet and get out of being homeless, is because when you're homeless, let's say your quality of life is X. Well, if you work really, really hard and you are patient and you talk to all the right people and you kick the drugs and all this stuff, then maybe your quality of life can be X plus 2. Which is to say that the elevation in quality of life is frankly not huge for a lot of people who get out of being homeless. I've seen people do it. I know it's possible. I know it takes a lot of work. And for some people, that is not enough of an incentive. there's not enough of a reason for them to stop being homeless and get their life back together. So, because of all of the resources that exist to make being homeless in Portland a little bit easier, it unfortunately frequently ends up backfiring. And rather than helping people lift themselves up, they just remain where they are. And in fact, attracts more people who maybe come from places where there aren't as many resources. So they can come to Portland and then just continue to be homeless, but then be in Portland instead. I actually know that it's not just people who are, who hear about Portland and come there. It's also people who maybe are sort of a nuisance in whatever small town that they're in, and their small town decides to give them bus therapy, is what it is called, where the city pays for a bus ticket, one-way bus ticket for this person, to go to a city with more resources like Portland. It's an unfortunate thing that happens. I don't really know what to do about that. It's just a reality. It's unfortunate. And I'm not just pulling these things out of the air. When I was a public defender, that was part of my job. Part of my job was to know about these resources that were available that I would then use to try to help my clients. The food one always stuck with me, though, because my clients would sometimes express frustration that people were trying to give them food, whether it was myself or people on the street or whatever else, because they felt that they could get that anyway. That's not what they needed, that's not what they wanted. They wanted other things, usually money. And the city just puts up with these gigantic homeless encampments. They're everywhere. You practically cannot find a highway exit that isn't completely taken over by homeless people. Their debris just lines the streets. Entire city blocks are just covered in tents. They're everywhere. And again, I am not trying to pretend like it is just a cakewalk to go from being homeless to having your life back together again. However, I have seen people do it. I know that it takes work, it takes hard work, but it is possible. And one of the nice things about Portland is that there are tools available to take advantage of and get your life back together again. However, because of all of the other resources that exist to help people basically continue to be homeless, it lowers the incentive. It makes it the math be like, well, I can just continue doing this and living with X level of quality of life, or I could really, really, really work hard and then live with a quality of life that's like maybe X plus 2, which is it's a real frustration and a problem. Is that yes, you can get your life back together from being homeless, and sometimes you can thrive and succeed and do amazing. But the reality is that for most people, getting their life back together after being homeless doesn't look awesome. The options are not awesome. They're frequently working at a minimum wage job in a not great apartment and eating not great food. It's better than being homeless. It's better than, in my opinion at least, it's better than worrying about if you're going to get stabbed or if someone's going to take all your stuff. However, it's just not enough for some people to motivate them to change their lives. Oregon recently decriminalized user amounts of essentially all controlled substances, which I'm all for the state staying out of people's business. However, what Oregon actually needs is more recovery services, more help fighting addiction. Until it has that, the problem isn't going to go away. The severe addiction problem in Portland is only going to get worse if we decriminalize it and do nothing to support the people who are in need. I cannot tell you the number of clients that I had when I was working a drug caseload as a public defender, who would come to me and say, like, I'm ready for treatment. Let's do this now. And the unfortunate reality was, I, the judge, everybody would have to tell them that that's wonderful, you're ready. Unfortunately, the system is not ready for you. That was a talk we would have to give them very frequently. And but the system is not ready for you. What is meant is that there's just not a bed for you right now. There's not a place in a treatment facility that is open for you right now. You need to get on a wait list to then maybe hopefully get treatment, in a couple weeks or something like that. And when you're living on the streets, that doesn't work. You don't know where you're going to be in a week. You don't know where your mind's going to be in a week. So many things can happen between now and a week. And a week is lucky. If you can get into treatment from the moment you decide, yes, I need treatment, to the moment you walk into the door of an inpatient facility, a week is like a golden ticket. The reality in Portland is more like, or at least it was back then, was like a month out frequently, or more sometimes, especially during the pandemic. Like, the wait times got super, super long. And so until we have more resources to shorten those wait times, to make treatment available on demand, that problem is just not going to go away. And the problems that come with addiction are not just these individuals suffering, but unfortunately, when they are in their addiction, they then cause a whole bunch of other problems for the rest of us, whether that's property thefts to support their addiction, or person crimes because they're whacked out of their minds on heroin or meth. Well, really meth. People on heroin don't really cause person crimes. But so it becomes, again, a livability issue. One that eventually just you get sick of. You get sick of crazy people on meth running up to you, saying angry, awful things, and you having to deal with that. It's not something that should happen in a place where you have to pay an absurd amount of money to live there. And Portland has a lot of recovery services, more than a lot of other places, especially other places its size. However, that doesn't mean that it has enough. It needs so much more, so many more resources, so much more money, unfortunately. It's going to cost a lot of money. And until that happens, the problem's not going to go away. It would be one thing if these people were just sleeping rough, not bothering anybody, just staying to themselves. However, that could not be further from the truth. These homeless metropolises give rise to all sorts of crime. The block-wide camp that was 1 block away from where I lived in Portland had a just totally brash, open bike black market. They just had tons and tons of bikes that were, I'm certain, not acquired legally. And they were just selling them out in the open all the time. And then also doing meth and heroin next to their bikes. Another rampant problem was car break-ins and car thefts. It is such a common problem that when we have to do jury selection for criminal trials in Portland, a common question is to ask people if they've ever been a victim of a crime. When you ask that question initially, almost no hands go up because they tend to think, violent crimes like robbery at gunpoint or that kind of thing. You have to then remind all of the potential jurors that having your car broken into is in fact a crime. Once you remind them of that, almost all of the hands in the room go up. That's how bad it is. I myself have been a victim of car break-in. I honestly have no idea how many times. Certainly, I'm going to say more than I can count on 2 hands. It actually got so bad in the last place that I lived in that I could not, it would have cost me more money to continue to repair my windows than the car was worth at that point. And unfortunately, the car battery died. I couldn't move it, and the city decided that my car was a nuisance. So They took it. Took my car. Again, there was a homeless encampment, literally kitty corner from where my car was, and that wasn't a sufficient enough nuisance, I guess, for the city to do anything about, but my car was, so they took that. I don't understand that rationale, but that's Portland for you. Cars left overnight at trailheads, say if you're backpacking, are getting broken into now. So what people do is they will drive from Portland out to trailheads, break into the cars, steal all the stuff, go back to Portland, use that credit card that they found to go buy things with, and then go hawk at pawn shops. I know this because it happened to a friend of mine, and we talked to the officer who was on the scene, and they said that this happens literally every Friday night there. That gives rise to a whole bunch of other questions, but still super frustrating. So I mentioned all types of crimes. So it's not just property theft that goes on thanks to these homeless camps, but also person crimes, right? So like I said, like I keep saying, there's this one camp that's about a block away from my apartment. There's actually another one that's like maybe 3 blocks in the other direction. They're everywhere. So this camp that's about a block away from me was a constant safety word for me, because they would be on meth or whatever, just like having a bad day, I guess, and I would just be trying to walk to my car. They would come at me, threaten me, see all sorts of terrible things. Yeah, I mean, I carry weapons for a reason, right? I've had to pull them out and all that jazz, and I just got sick of that. That's not what you want in essentially your backyard. I didn't feel safe in my own little 2-block area, and it wasn't just there, right? It's like in other places too. That's just in my home. That's like the one place that I would like to at least feel a little bit safe, and I didn't. So it's not just survival crimes. It's also these people not dealing with playing with others well. They just generally made me feel unsafe in my own neighborhood. It's not just the homeless population that's been destroying the city. The rioters have been running through the streets, breaking windows, leaving bedlam in their wake. There are still tons of broken out and boarded up windows all over the city. The Apple store downtown has a military-grade barricade around it because their windows have been broken out so many times. There's graffiti covering huge swaths of the city, which isn't always bad, but for the most part, it's not the good kind of graffiti, so it ends up making the place look trashy and broken down. It's possible to live in Portland and avoid some of this crime, but then you're paying a ton of money to live out in the sticks. Portland has become so insanely expensive for the size and the quality of life that you get living there. It is almost impossible to find a decent bite to eat for less than $10 in the city. When it comes to housing, you can either buy a fixer-upper for the same price that it costs to buy a mansion in most other cities, or you can rent an apartment for the same amount of money it would cost to rent a house in another city. That second part is what I'm doing. For the same price that I paid to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, I am now paying to rent a 4 to 5 bedroom house in Las Vegas. And if we're being honest, it's more like at least a 6-bedroom house by Portland standards. And guess what? I never get threatened here. It's pretty nice. Portland has just become prohibitively expensive for what you get, in my opinion. Portland tries to pass itself off as being this place where you can live your authentic truth. You can be whoever you want to be. You can be your honest self. And in some ways, that's true. If you want to ride a unicycle and have a knitting collection, great. Portland's going to love you. If you want to own guns and refuse to put your pronouns in your bio, you're going to have problems. Want to cover yourself in tattoos and dye your hair and have piercings in all sorts of new and exciting places? Great! Portland is your new home. If you believe in having traditional values and maybe have some kind of faith-based ideas, you're going to run into some problems in Portland. Unfortunately, what I think a lot of this comes down to is Portland being a micro example of the macro phenomenon of the left tending to devour itself, or Moro style. Its inability to have a diversity of thought is leading to its own self-destruction. I decided to leave Portland for all of these reasons. I don't see it turning around anytime soon. If I had stayed in Portland, I know what the next year would look like for me. It would look like stagnation at best, and things crumbling even further at worst. I don't want that. I want to live in a place that wants to grow, that wants to thrive, and that wants to create new opportunities for its citizens. I'm sick of everything needing to be perfect. I'm sick of everything catering to the lowest common denominator, and I'm sick of some angry, loud voices ruining it for the rest of us. Vegas is essentially the opposite of all of the things I have talked about today regarding Portland. So for now, it is my new home. Perhaps I will make a video later on about why I chose Vegas and what I like about it here. But for now, I'll just say that it is the opposite of Portland in all the best ways. I still have lots of friends in Portland, so I'm sure I'll be back to visit at some point. But for now, I need some space from that place. Portland was a great home for many, many years, but unfortunately it stopped being a great home. I really lament the fact that I've lost this friend. That's how I see it. I feel like I lost a friend. And honestly, on a more personal level, I feel betrayed by Portland. I feel betrayed by the city that I loved and committed to try to make better, a city that I engaged with on a civic level many times over the years, a city that I wanted to see grow and change and thrive. And I feel like it just sort of told me to F off. So here I am, Fing off to a better and brighter future in Las Vegas. I hope Portland turns around. I hope things get better for Portland. I don't want Portland to be how it is right now. It honestly hurts me. It makes me sad to know that Portland is in such a dark place. It's an incredible place, and I hope it gets back to being incredible someday. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you got something out of this video, please click those like and subscribe buttons. Until next time.